Hello and welcome to this new episode hosted by the Policy Center for the New South. Today I am delighted to be joined by Mavis Owusu-Gyamfi. She is the President and CEO of the African Center for Economic Transformation to talk about the financial constraints for African development. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for the invitation, Ahmed.
So first question, what are the innovative transformation models that can be adapted or scaled within the continent?
So thanks, Ahmed. I think we are at a point in our continent right now where we've got to stop talking about the fact that we are innovative. We have great innovations. We like saying that a lot. So every time we say, where is Africa going and what can Africa offer? We talk about our incredibly rapidly growing youth population. We talk about how innovative they are. But innovation does not create jobs. Innovation does not feed people. Innovation does not realize the human well-being we are after. So what I'd like to see is for us to take some of the fantastic ideas that we have to scale. Okay, so we have people on the continent who have built, everything from bespoke chocolate companies. We have people on the continent who are doing amazing designer wear. We have people on the continent who are doing incredible things in the arts. We have innovations in the care industry. But there are these tiny programs, okay? And on the other side, we keep talking about how we've not diversified our economies. We keep talking about how we are not export competitive and most of our countries are reliant on the export of, raw materials. And so there is a bit of a disconnect, don't you agree? And so what I'd like to see is I'd like to see our countries work together and be more intentional in helping these small innovations go to the next level of scale. So, for example, I come from Ghana and we produce cocoa, but we ship cocoa solids out of the continent. And then we look at East Africa, they produce milk powder and they ship it. We look at some of our countries, they produce sugar and they ship it. Everything we do, we ship out. And then these innovative chocolatiers actually end up importing everything to produce high quality chocolate. Or our fashion industry, we ship our cotton, it gets processed in East Asia, it gets shipped back, we add just a tiny bit of value, and that's it. None of it is at scale. Then on the other hand, we talk about how we don't have jobs. And so if we did absolutely nothing, okay, but really started to think about how we build value chains, how we work together, not as just Morocco, not as just Ghana, not as just Nigeria, but we look at specialisms in the value chain and where we all add value in that chain. And then we work together and we start to build manufactured products. We start to develop high quality service industries that first and foremost, we can trade amongst ourselves, but most importantly, we can export. And it means we then become export competitive. It means we have access to foreign currency, desperately needed foreign currency. It means we are generating jobs. So textiles industry, I know that's something that Morocco is very passionate about. It's something that Ghana is very keen on. We grow cotton in about 10 countries on the continent. We export it to East Asia. Then we buy bales of cloth. Then we print a bit, we add a bit of value, we ship shirts and low value clothes to Europe. When they wear it once or twice, they discard it and it ends up back here as secondhand clothes. We could change that, absolutely change that. And if we used that value chain, okay, we could actually create not just an amazing diversified economy for about 4 or 5 countries, but what we could also do is create not thousands, not tens of thousands, but millions of jobs, decent, well-paying jobs for our rapidly growing youth population.
For you, the priority is to work on regional value chains, and you mentioned different sectors, like agriculture sector, textiles, and many others. I want to come back to the question about the primary sources of financially constraints that hinder economic development of African countries. Those efforts, if you want to build a regional value chains, of course, many governments are facing financial constraints. What are those primary sources of financial constraints?
Okay, so I think you look, as a continent, we have two primary sources of finance. We have money that we can generate on our doorsteps, so be it money from domestic resource mobilization, be it money from our regional financial institutions, be it money from our pension funds. You know, we have sources of finance on the continent, but we also have access to sources of international finance. You know, we have access to debt. Debt is not bad. It's the source of debt, and it's how the debt is used that becomes a problem, okay? We have access to debt. We have access to the multilateral development banks. So we have two major sources of finance that we can use. I think the challenge we have at the moment is that we are very exercised about how we get more new money, instead of asking ourselves, how do we make the money we have right now work better for us? How do we make it smarter? So I have a real frustration when it comes to inefficient use of public sector money, because it is my taxes, it is your taxes, it is your debt. Your children will be paying this debt someday, okay? It's our money. So I have a real challenge when it comes to inefficient use of public sector money. And a recent study showed that on average, okay, our efficient use of public sector money, okay, is as low as 39% on average across the continent. So it's as high as, you know, almost 100% in places like Rwanda, and as low as about 30% in places like Nigeria when it comes to so for every dollar in Nigeria, we use 30 cents effectively, and in Rwanda, we use almost the full dollar effectively, okay? That is a lot of money being wasted. So let's start with efficiency in the public finances we have right now, okay? We can save millions, possibly billions, if we start with that. Let's find ways of really managing illicit financial flows. You know, we talk about how Africa loses between 50 to 100 million, okay, billion every year to illicit financial flows. Some are things that are on our doorstep that we have control of. Some are issues related to the global financial architecture. Let's start by correcting what we have control of, the governance, the financial management systems that we have control of, and let's stem that illicit financial flow. Then let's work together as a continent and use our seat at the G20 to hold the rest of the world to account for spending, for building systems that makes it difficult for us to get those illicit financial flows back. Let's look at our tax base. We give so much tax holidays to FDIs, and we have a lot of history to show that at the end of the 10-15 year tax holiday, they reduce the size of the company to nothing and they go. Okay, so we've had 15 years of an FDI. We've barely generated any jobs from them. We haven't gotten any taxes from them. Then off they go. Why?
But at the same time, we say if you don't give these tax holidays for FDIs, we will not attract them at the same time. So is this the main dilemma about FDI attraction in the continent?
You know something, Ahmed, I would say that this was a really valid point maybe 20, 30 years ago. Not now. Okay. It's true, our doing business indicators are not the best in the world, but they are far superior to where they were 30 years ago, okay? We have a rapidly growing middle class that we know these companies want to access, okay? We have better infrastructure. Not all countries have the infrastructure that countries need, but come on, really, Morocco with your infrastructure? Hello? So I think that we are still adhering to practices that were suitable 30 years ago, but actually, no. We need to rethink the policies around that. So there are all these things. There are issues related to how we find savings in our public utilization of resources. You know, everybody's talking about digital public digital public investment, digital public, I've forgotten the terminology, but it's basically digitalizing our public services. India is saving $1 billion a month after it did it effectively. What's stopping us from doing it and finding the savings? So I think I'd like to start domestically with that. Then the other area is we all have development financial institutions, okay? They are so politicized that they are actually not investing in growth and transformation. A lot of our development financial institutions, sometimes when you look at their portfolio and you kind of think, how? You're a bank. How did you end up with this portfolio? Let's separate them from politics and let them be real financial institutions to help us transform and diversify our economies. We have we have regional financial institutions. They could do so much innovation and leverage their books, okay? They could work better with our development banks. They could really work more closely with commercial banks at the country level to really innovate and leverage their current asset base. Okay, so there's a lot of smart money to be made on the continent. Now, once we've made progress on that smart money, and it shouldn't be separate, we should be doing it simultaneously, as we are making progress on smart domestic finance. Oh, sorry, let me go back on domestic finance. Don't overtax your golden goose. You know, every time we're always going back to increasing taxes on the same things. We can broaden our tax base. There are so many areas we can, I talked about FDI, property taxes. There are so many new areas we can broaden our tax base on without necessarily crippling the very few sectors that are trying to grow, which is what we always do when it comes to increasing domestic resource mobilization. But then we look at the global financial architecture and we ask ourselves some fundamental questions, okay? We want to borrow, okay? Why is it that when we borrow, we are charged a premium? Because the way our economies are actually assessed is flawed. It doesn't take into account so much of our assets. You know, it just takes GDP. We are asset rich, but it doesn't take any of that into account. How do we renegotiate with rating agencies? How do we work with countries to build the skills to help rating agencies to reassess them so that when we go to the markets to borrow, we are borrowing at lower costs, okay? How do we get the multilateral development banks, the World Bank, our own African Development Bank, to do a much better job of leveraging their balance sheets, tripling, quadrupling it? How do we do that? How do we ensure that when the IMF is working with the world to develop a G20 framework on debt, it actually takes our views into consideration? How do we collaborate with other southern nations to build a borrowers club so that we have a much stronger voice in the global debt architecture? So there are two levels that we need to be working on. For me, I often feel that when we're having this conversation, we behave as though we lack agency. We don't. We really don't lack agency. We have a window of opportunity for change, okay? And if we don't take advantage of that window for opportunity for change, all of those things we like talking about, you know, Africa's potential, Africa's this, Africa's that, will be wasted. Honestly, Ahmed, you cannot eat potential. Potential will not feed you.
Unless you're using it for something.
Unless you're using it for something. So for me, you know, our window of cashing in on our opportunities, and we have a lot, you know, we have demography on our side. We can either turn it into a dividend or we can turn it into a major crisis. We have most of the natural resources for green growth that the world desperately needs. We can either turn it into an opportunity or we can sit back and let the world come, take it and build it, and we import it, okay? We have one of the youngest populations in the world in a very rapidly aging population, in a rapidly aging world. We can either invest in skilling our young people to be the best service market in the world, or they will scramble and take dangerous ships to run away. Let's stop talking about potential. In fact, my ambition is I don't hear another leader talk about our potential because we're already showing results.
Got it. What role do domestic financial institutions and markets play in either alleviating or exacerbating financial constraints for economic development in Africa?
Okay. So I think, you know, domestic financial institutions have a great role to play in this space. So, you know, we have our central banks, okay? And one of the work that ACET has been doing recently is to what extent are central banks on the continent facilitating economic transformation? And to be honest, they are not. They're not, you know, they are focused very much on monetary policy. That's it. They just look at monetary policy, and often they are used as a buffer for fiscal crisis. That's the role they play. There isn't sufficient work being done from central banks in deepening financial systems and financial sectors to enable those financial sectors to actually invest in the growth of our economy. So that's a fundamental challenge. Our commercial banks find it, and equity funds, etc., find it so much easier to invest in bonds than they do to invest in growth industries. In fact, let's be honest, you and I would not borrow from them. The interest rates are pretty high. So what we haven't quite managed to do is to create a domestic financial sector that is incentivized to invest in the growing of the economy, okay? We also haven't built a robust savings culture. We really haven't, you know. If you look at the level of savings on our continent, it's low, okay? But one of the reasons the level of savings in our continent is low is because of the boom-bust cycle of our economies. So if I put my money in a bank and in a crisis, the bank goes under, I lose my money, you know, despite all the central bank insurances in place, I am struggling to get my money 3 or 4 years later. Am I going to trust financial institutions? No. We've seen a number of African countries that really borrowed on the domestic market. A lot of middle-class Africans invested in bonds. They are now in a debt crisis. There's been a write-off. Lots of people have lost their money. So we thought we were making great progress a few years ago in terms of deepening our financial sector, but it was actually quite shallow, okay? And so what we need to do is we need a system that actually looks at the different parts of a financial market, okay? Do we have equity funds? What are the equity funds doing, okay? Do we have grants. Are the grants helping us build, really investable pipeline of projects for the equity funds to invest in? Are we incentivizing our commercial financial institutions to invest in our industry and invest in industrial growth? Are we giving our development banks room to, leverage their finances by working with other financial institutions, broadening their asset base? Are we giving them room to do risk investment in growth sectors? There is a lot of work that can be done in really deepening our financial sector to work for transformation of our economies. And I'm not quite sure we are there yet. Now, your next question might be, why not? I was really struck today when the executive president said, we don't have a shortage of solutions. We don't. We really don't have a shortage of solutions. We seem to struggle with getting our leaders to take on board some of those solutions. And, the problem with, entities like ours is that we have long list of policy recommendations. We have work to do in helping with some prioritization and sequencing. So we will say to the government, over the next year, these are your 3 priorities. Next year, these are your 3 priorities. Let's help them to sequence and prioritize, and let's really collect the data, push for the data, to track progress and hold our leaders to account, because that's the only way we are going to hopefully force the leadership we need to drive change on this continent that we love so much, yet feel so frustrated about sometimes.
And that's the reason why we hold this interviews. It's mainly to address those kinds of policy recommendations to policymakers, so they can really take the next steps to change the financial systems and to enhance the better life standards for our citizens in our continent. I would like to thank you for all of these valuable insights. I have learned so much from you today, and thank you for joining us in this episode. Dear audience, thank you very much for following us, and stay tuned for new episodes where we discuss economic and challenges in the African continent. Thank you very much.